Click here to subscribe our channel and do not forget to press the bell icon to get regular updates of our videos.
Hello friends, good evening to all of you. So I am back with another video on Sociology Optional subject for UPSC CSE mains examination. In this video we are going to cover protest and agitation. That's why it is part 1, and the rest will be covered in the upcoming videos. That is the social movement, collective action and revolution under the politics and society. So friend, please do these shares. It will really motivate me to continue this awesome course. Share as much as possible so that more and more people will get benefited. Comment and like the video and ask any doubt if you have. And now you can also follow us on every page, that is facebook.com/Unorthodox Academy. So friend, as you know that we are covering slot 5, that is politics, western and Indian, and paper 1 we are nearly going to finish politics and society, as the upper 3 topics of this are covered, that is sociological theories of power, power elite, bureaucracy, pressure groups and political parties, nations, state, citizenship, democracy, civil society and ideology. And this video we are going to cover protest and agitation. So first we consider the protest. So political protest has a long albeit uncertain history in the repertoire of political action and the course of political development. From de Tocqueville descriptions of the French revolutions to Gourvay man rebel, some analysts have described protest as a tool used by the voiceless and politically frustrated to pressure the government, and in contrast other scholars claim that the contemporary protest has become an extension of conventional politics by the means used by those who are generally active in politics. So in simple words, protest is a form of political expression that seeks to bring about social or political change by influencing the knowledge, attitudes and behavior of the public or the policies of an organization or institution. So protests often take the form of overt activities such as public displays, demonstration and civil disobedience, but may also include covert activities such as petitions, boycott, lobbying and various online activities. So protesters engage in protest activities motivated by both individual rewards, that is including a variety of personal benefit and gratification, and the collective incentives such as benefits that are realized by a large class of individuals that does not necessarily include the individual protester. Most protest represents the collective interest and the issue of activist group, coalitions or the social movements that challenge mainstream institutions. In the process, they serve a number of important democratic functions, including providing opportunities for participation and expression for individuals and as a potential engine of social change for communities and nations. And always remember, unaddressed protest may grow and widen into agitation, social movement, collective action and political or social revolutions. So now we see the 3 perspectives on the sources of protest. Since the inception of modern social sciences, scholars have pursued an answer to the elusive questions: why do people protest? Perhaps because of the breadth of the phenomena itself, there is no single answer or dominant explanation in the literature. Instead, 3 major theoretical frameworks have emerged. The first being grievance and resource, second being political opportunity structures, and third being the cultural explanation. So first we considered the grievance versus resources. So basically there are 2 distinct theories in the literature on protest that use similar variables to construct contrasting explanation of protest. So grievance theory argues that deprivation and dissatisfaction stimulate protest. In contrast, resource theory claims that influence and a resource-rich environment provides a context where contentious groups might flourish, and thus protest is more common. Because these 2 theories converge on a similar set of explanatory variables, albeit with opposite hypothesized effects, it is better to discuss them together. So first we see the grievance theory. So grievance theory views protest as a response to societal problems and unmet citizens' grievances. Ted Good's Why Men Rebel provide a modern introduction to the grievance theory. He argued that when challenging social conditions cause people to experience relative deprivations, the likelihood of protest and rebellion significantly increases. That is, feeling of grievance or dissatisfactions are a prime cause of political action. So when people have significantly less than what they think they are entitled to, they experience relative deprivations, which Gur argues is a general spur to action. So Gur further identified a range of societal factors that might produce feelings of relative deprivations and thereby predict the occurrence and intensity of political rebellion across nations. These factors include short-term changes, the national economy inflation rates and the GNP growth. rates, as well as long-term economic and social deprivation. These indicators were positively related to goods measures of turmoil, which is the combination of demonstration, strikes, riots, and other forms of political protest. Moving beyond goods, poor pupils movement, demonstration by racial minorities, and student protest of 1960s and 70s were explained in terms of unsatisfied grievance. Then Ovinen found that poor economic performance measured by inflation rate significantly increased political conflict in developing nations. Schuckmann demonstrated that income inequality is a significant predictor of cross-national levels of political conflict. In short, the logic that grievances, especially poor economic conditions, underlie the use of protest and other challenging activities is a prominent explanation in the historical and empirical literature on political protest. Now we see the resource theory. Resource mobilization theory provides virtually a mirror image of why people protest. From this perspective, protest movements require more than a collective experience of deprivations. McCarthy and Zalt argued that the resource base facilitates protest activities by social movements. The existence of social movements organization to mobilize the public is a crucial variable linking dissatisfaction to political action. In short, where a rich civil society exists and citizens freely engage in a variety of voluntary associations, there is a greater propensity towards organizing protest activities as well as other forms of political action. So more broadly, the socio-economic development of a nation creates a resource environment that might stimulate collective actions. Extensive non-governmental organizations and other civil society groups are more likely exist in affluent nations that possesses the resources to support a large voluntary sector. A nation's socio-economic development produces dense communication structure, mass education, urbanization, and high degree of social mobility, factors that can increase the resource available to protest group. So thus a nation's economic development level can strongly influence group access to resources that facilitate political action. Now we see the second factor, that is the political opportunity structure. So the political opportunity structure is a second framework used to explain why people mobilize outside of conventional channels of participation. It explains reasons for protest with three themes. So first, some scholars stress the open-closed nature of the political process. So closed systems are more likely to push actors outside conventional channels and onto the streets, increasing levels and degree of unconventional political action. Thus, argues that the protest is more likely when groups lack access to institutionalized channel of political influence. So according to this theory, we should see more protests in societies where there are fewer channels for citizens access to politics, or in oppressive societies because institutional channels are closed off to influence from below. In contrast, open political systems encourage higher rates of protest, albeit in less contentious form. Political openness exists when individuals can make demands and express their opinions without fear of reprisal, and decision makers are willing to listen, and perhaps even sympathetic to the demands made by groups. Openness increases the use of protest because the cost of protest is lower and the opportunities more numerous as compared to the cost and opportunities in more repressive situations. So other studies maintain that political systems with a mixture of open and closed characteristics are most conducive to protest. This curvilinear hypothesis holds that contentious protest is low in the most open societies because of the easy availability of influence through conventional channels, and low in the most closed societies because these states do not facilitate public action or suppress such activity. This hypothesis expects protest to be the highest in countries with mid-level openness. So a second approach to the political opportunity structures considered the potential restrictions on protests. Ted Gur, for instance, argued that the repressive capacities of the state, as measured by the size of police or military forces, can retard the use of challenging actions by critics of the state. Third, political opportunity structure theory suggests that the effectiveness of government may affect the likelihood of protest, although the directions of this effect is unclear. On the one hand, citizens may protest under conditions of institutional incompetence or low state capacity because they are frustrated by the incapacity of a state to deliver. On the other hand, citizens may protest more under conditions of institutional competence because they have the opportunity to engage institutions that can better process their demand. Now we consider the cultural explanation for protest. So another theme stresses the impact of values and ideology on political action. In the broadest term, there are frequent claims that the political culture of a nation shapes the repertoire of citizen action. For instance, protest is seemingly embraced by the French political culture, while in Britain protest is gentrified and less common. In broader terms, several authors have argued that protest is more tolerated and more common in Western democracies, and other cultural traditions also seem to restrict the use of protest. For example, it appears less compatible with the Confucius tradition of East Asia. Another cultural explanation builds upon modernization theory. In addition to the socio-economic changes that accompany modernization, modernization also produces a political culture that is more willing to question authority, to emphasize self-expression and participation, and more willing to change established political elites. This changing citizens' orientation encourages protest activity. Advanced industrial societies also experience the emergence of new social movements and a more active civil society which advocates protest and other forms of direct action. And these processes thus produce a social movement society where protest represents a conventional form of action. A final cultural variable is the distribution of ideological orientations in a nation. Typically, scholars maintain that leftist extremism or rightist extremism stimulate contentious politics. Bingham Powell showed that support for extremist parties was positively related to the incidence of protests, riots, and deaths from political conflict. Extremism of the left or right might provide a mobilizing environment for protest and indirectly may tap the extent of political grievance in a nation. In addition, a highly polarized nations may find it more difficult to agree on peaceful political outcomes, so protest and violence follow. Now we consider the agitation. Bowers and Oakes defines agitation as following. So agitation occurs when people outside the normal decision-making establishment advocate significant social change and encounter a degree of resistance within the establishment such as to require more than the normal discursive means of persuasion. Another key point of the definition is that agitation only occurs when steps are taken beyond normal persuasive rhetoric. For instance, distributing flyers that urge students to vote against an increase in fee is considered within ordinary persuasive means. However, if the students have a sit-in to oppose unfavorable measures taken by administrations, they are participating in a form of agitations. So in other words, agitation is defined as social agitations in and by people outside the decision-making corridors of power. Agitations for significant levels of or kinds of social change that may be structural change, legal change, or other kinds of significant change. Continued agitation against the establishment of decision makers who resist to such an extent that extreme measures are required, that acceptable channels of discourse and persuasions are exceeded. So now we see the agitation strategies and stages. So although they are not technically considered agitation, normal persuasive measures often precede agitation. This stage is referred to by Bowers and Oakes as petition. This is the first stage or the strategies in agitation. So this stage is crucial to an agitation movement because it establishes credibility and gives the establishment an early opportunity to comply with their demands. So if the establishment does not comply but rather has met the agitators with avoidance or suppression, then the agitators often escalate to the promulgation stage. And tactics included in this stage include all tactics designed to win social support for the agitators' position, including informal picketing, posters, distribution of pamphlets, or a mass protest meeting. So two strategies often employed at this point are the exploitation of the mass media and finding legitimizers or credible spokespersons. Both of these serves to raise the public awareness of the issue while hopefully gaining respect of the agitator's ideology. And the next, the agitator often use solidification tactics, so which occurs within the movement rather than outside. So solidification tactics produce or reinforce cohesiveness of members, thereby increasing responsiveness. This includes plays, song, slogans, and expressive symbols, and in group publications. An example of this would be the upraised fist used by the Black Panthers. And the strategy of non-violent resistance is often referred to by the names of famous agitators who were known for this strategy: Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi, non-violent resistance places agitators in a position in which they are violating laws or customs they consider to be unjust or destructive of human dignity. This includes sit-ins and schools boycott. The agitators participate in activities that would be legal or accepted if the establishment conceded. An example of this is when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white man. She was non-violently protesting laws and customs that the civil rights movement wanted to see change. When the protest laws are perceived to be very unjust, this stage often turns violent. When the establishment continues to resist, the theory behind non-violent protest, according to Junior King, is that all of the resistor's energy is directed to the policy he is violating and not in the destructions of the perpetrators. A second aspect is that the resistance does not seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, rather to win its friendship and understanding. Another strategy used is called escalation or the confrontation, and it is designed to make the establishment overreact to threats of disruptions and then looks foolish to the public. The agitators then hope this will lead to reforms instituted by the larger society witnessing the disproportionate action taken by the establishment. For example, Anna Hazare agitation at Ramlila Maidan in Delhi. And now we see the control strategies. So the Bowers and Oates came up with the 4 rhetorical strategies for control. The first being is the avoidance, and one of the most widely used avoidance tactics is counter persuasion. This occurs when the establishment tries to convince the agitators that they are wrong. If they are successful, the threat is minimized, and if they are unsuccessful, the establishment has still gained time without changing their ideology or structure. The second strategy is the suppression, which institutions usually do not resort to until all avoidance tactics has failed. These tactics focus on weakening or removing the agitator's spokesperson. This is often done by harassment, denial of the agitator's demand or banishment. Banishment can terminate a movement by removing its leader and a spokesperson. A third control strategy is adjustment. Establishment may do this by adopting, modifying, or altering their structures, goals, or personnel. One tactic is to accept some of the means of agitations. In essence, this tactic serves to take away the attention received when the establishment instead reacts to the agitation. A movement may likely gain momentum if the establishment reacts to its agitation strategies by calling attention to its ideology. And the last strategy in the rhetoric of control is capitulation. This can be seen as the last resort of an establishment and has been known to be used when total destructions by the agitator is imminent. So thank you guys for listening and watching this video. Thank you.